Today we're going to start making face jugs, and what you get for your clay is all you get. We're going to be working on a piece of cloth, at least building on a piece of cloth. So first thing you want to do when you get your clay is rip off a chunk, not half of it, maybe a third of it. Rip off a chunk. This piece is reserved for your parts, which would be your face on your jug. And if you want to rip off a little more, you can. And some of you might want a handle to go on that as well. The rest of your clay we're going to use to build your pot. So we start out, rip off a little chunk. We squeeze it out like a fat caterpillar. And at this point, we set it on the table, hands together, and then you roll apart. So together, roll apart. Together, roll apart. And we're using our fingers as our measuring tools because you want your pot to have a solid base. So we want to measure like the width of your thumb or the width of your first finger. See how wide that is? That's a good size for your very first coil. You don't want to start too skinny. Then we take your coil and curl it up like a sleeping snake. And we smooth one side. The trick is to smooth it without smashing it to bits. You don't want to build on a pancake. You will not have a solid structure. So I just smoothed one side, not worrying about the other. This will be the bottom. Rip off another chunk. Squeeze out the caterpillar. Hands together, roll apart, and repeat. Make sure you're applying pressure. This coil also needs to be about the same size as your thumb or your first finger in width. And I shouldn't hear anyone saying that their coil is too short because we can always add on. Speaking of which, when we add on, we build on top of the base and slowly curl it around. And before we get too high, before we add on any more, we're taking the flat part of your thumb, the widest part of your thumb, and we're trying to smooth those coils together. So we're going against the grain. The coils go horizontally. I'm going to rub vertically. And you're still trying to avoid pinching so you don't flatten your project. It's important to smooth as you build. That way your project will stay together better. Kids who try to wait until it's all rolled and then smooth end up with it falling apart in their hands because the moisture of the clay is the only thing holding this together. You're trying to avoid digging trenches in your clay. You'll know it if you have any, because then it looks like there's a pile of mud at the bottom. Just use that wide, flat part of your thumb to smooth it together. All right, next section. Squeeze. Again. Make the caterpillar. Roll. And now they can get a little smaller because we're starting to go up. While you're building, you never want your coils to be skinnier than your pinky finger. If you want this to have a belly that sticks out, then when you set your coils on, instead of having them so they're placed one directly on top of the other, if you want it to go out, you scooch it over just a tad bit, and then you'll have a little bit of belly to your pot. I have my next coil on and smoothed. Got another coil ready to go. And since I have a little bit of a belly, I now want my pot to go in, which means you place the coil so it's just slightly, very slightly, inside the one before it. And that will give you a narrower neck on your pot. And then smooth that together. I have my pot about as tall as I want it to get, and you'll notice this edge is uneven. So I'm going to roll one little coil to fill up the gap. One little coil to take up that space to try to make it a little more even. And then all that extra I have, I can use for parts. Alright, I have my top coil on. It's still a little wobbly when you look at it, so I can use the table, tap it gently to even that out on the top of my pot. And as I spin it around, you notice that's also a little bit wobbly. So I could take my fingers and very gently on the inside try to stretch the clay a little bit so it looks a little more uniform. You can also do the opposite on the outside, kind of squeeze things in so the clay is a little more uniform. Because traditional face jugs are made on the potter's wheel, and we're doing ours by hand instead. Now, if you don't like all these little bumps you have on the outside, we can fix that with our good friend, the sponge. Take our sponge, you get it wet at the sink, you squeeze it out in the sink, and then we use it to gently wipe away imperfections. You especially want to make sure that the lip of our jug is smooth. And rub all the way around. Just don't drown it, because clay plus too much water equals mud. And don't worry about teeny tiny imperfections, because these jugs are going to have some. And when you get that far, then you're at a stopping point and ready for parts.